I think it is important that I try and give you some sense of my background, because one of the interesting facts is that now, after 40 odd years, I'm in a position where I can look back and consider what's happened during the course of my life and hopefully give you some of those insights. I went to a lecture during the course of last week where there was a teacher who is a similar age as myself, who's taught most of his life. And he was talking about the distinction between wisdom, knowledge, and information. And I'm sure you'll pick that up during the course of today's lectures, but it isn't a question of just dumping information onto you. It's a question of you picking up the nuances of other people's experiences, hopefully in the similar sort of fields that you want to pursue and become more able in. To give you a bit of my background, is that when I was 16, I was actually the junior champion of Great Britain in terms of what was then the 100 yards. They don't do that anymore. That was for the under-20s, so I was quite an exceptional athlete. I had a world best time for the 200 metres at that time. And I was selected as part of the Olympic probables camp to go to Mexico. And at that training camp, I damaged my back. And that really was the end of my aspirations in that field. So what I wanted to put across to you is that I can honestly share the aspirations that you have, you know, the determination that's necessary, the dedication that is required, and of course often the single-mindedness that's required, the pain that you have to go through in terms of the training criteria. But I can reflect back now and look at it from a slightly different perspective, in the sense that when I injured myself, there was a sort of an aspect of sport which was very dominant at that stage, that if you succeeded, you succeeded despite the system. Today it's a very, very different consideration. If you show promise, invariably there are a number of different people who can come behind you and share their expertise in lots of different fields to allow you to maximise your potential. That includes obviously biomechanics, and it includes biochemistry, and it includes psychology. And all of those fields are very appropriate in order for most people, if they want to succeed, to look at in quite a lot of detail. Elite water is something which is quite fundamental to all of this. And when I stopped being, let's say, an elite athlete, I became a geologist. I studied in the field of geology, and I worked in Africa for a good number of years. And I have qualifications in what's called mineral exploration. I looked for copper, lead, zinc, gold, uranium throughout the African continent. And then I had a relatively early midlife crisis, and I went to the States and I retrained as a chiropractor. And that was 30 years ago, and I went then to England, and I've been working as a chiropractor, come nutritionist for the past 30 years. And what I had discovered quite early on in my career, was that the minerals that I've actually explored for and mined actually have a very definitive, fundamental physiological and psychological role, again in helping us to perform at our optimum. And so the marriage was a very interesting one for me, in the sense that I had a classical geological training, but now it's more over into the therapeutic side, and that how minerals, trace elements and ultra trace elements can be of benefit. So I've not used one of these before, it's just tapping it, is it? So in my day, we used to look at the 5 S's if you want to maximise your performance, and basically that's speed, strength, stamina, suppleness, which is what quite a few people forget about, and obviously psychology. And each one of those needs to have their real emphasis placed, because without actually looking at each one of those in depth, again, it's a question of maximising your potential. You ain't basically going to get there. But how is that achieved? Because it's all very well actually having a knowledge or an insight, but you're the ones that have to then put that into practice. And of course, you need a good coach, you need good training partners, you need facilities. And more these days, when you're pushing the limits, there's a requirement of the age that we live in, we need specialist guidance. And that's often in the realms of biomechanics, the chiropractor, the osteopath, the physiotherapist, but more and more in terms of biochemistry. What is this body? How can we actually push it to that limit without it actually creating a problem of exhaustion and undermining ourselves? Psychology and, well, whatever that was. You need to understand some basic concepts. Now, the way in which I work with people in my practice, this aspect of trying to understand basic concepts is very, very fundamental to me, because often we sort of lose sight of the bigger picture. So bear with me, because this is not going on about ELETE, this is going on about general sort of concepts. This is something which is very easy to understand. This is, let's say, your normal level of resistance, and then you're asked to do something. The body responds negatively initially, and then it adapts, compensates and adjusts. And in here, you're dealing with the resistance criteria of what the body is required to do. But somewhere along the line, you're going to become into the exhaustive phase. And we've all experienced that in terms of our training. We've pushed, 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 and then the exhaustion hits in. And of course, in each and every event, whether it be speed, stamina or otherwise, it's that distance there which makes the difference. Can I push this limit that little bit further? If I can push that limit that little bit further, then in accruing in terms of the triathlon, you're going to get there that much quicker, and so on and so forth. But if you can think of that as, let's say, a base, I won't go into that particular one. We'll look at this particular concept. This baseline you can consider, let's say, the optimum human being, Adam and Eve, for instance. This is the symptom threshold. So the distance between the two is that this is what you're given at birth. And everybody is different. This is our genetic heritage. This is where we can start off. But the body, whether you're a creationist or whether you're an evolutionist, our human body is at its maximum now. It's absolutely fantastic. It's taken 4.5 billion years to get to the point where we can adapt, compensate and adjust to the environment we live in. That's an enormous amount of time. And the body is so good at this adaptation, so that despite the fact that during the course of our lives, sorry, this is the adaptive capacity from here to here. This is a symptom threshold. Despite the fact during the course of our lives that we have a variety of different biomechanical issues. I mean, the classic one, of course, is birth trauma. We all have to go through that. And often there's a lot of problems that relate to birth trauma, but we adapt, we compensate and we adjust, and the symptoms aren't present. There's a lot of biochemical imbalances, of which I'll talk a little shortly. But again, the body is so good at adapting, compensating and adjusting that we never ever experience a symptom per se. There's a lot of psychological difficulties that we all have, and exactly the same sort of principles. So although you may be performing, you're not necessarily performing at your optimum, because there's a symptom threshold which you haven't really exceeded. You're asymptomatic, in other words. But invariably, somewhere along the line, you're going to come to the point whereby a trauma takes place. The body cannot cope in terms of adapting, compensating, adjusting. It doesn't speak Danish. It doesn't speak English, Russian, Chinese or whatever. So it has to express it in a symptomatic way. And of course, dependent on our constitutional makeup, that symptomatic way can be varied, again, with the same sort of problem that might present. If you can then look at these things in detail and start dealing with them in a proactive sense, you can bring this adaptive capacity right down and therefore be able to adapt, compensate and adjust in the fields that you want to perform and pursue. If we look at this in a bit more detail specifically, let's say with the idea of biochemistry, of course, my fundamental consideration to all of this is actually hydration. But you can be hydrated and still not have a symptom per se. There can be mineral deficiencies. You can have cow's milk intolerance, B6 deficiency. Tartrazine is a colorant that some people react to. Impaired essential fatty acid metabolism, glucose intolerance, you have a junk food diet, you can be exposed to toxins in your environment. You certainly would have potentially a gut dysbiosis, but you've got a very strong constitution. You can deal with these things. You adapt, you compensate and you adjust. You don't have a symptom. It doesn't mean to say that you're performing at your best, but the body doesn't necessarily give that symptomatic response. Then you have a particularly hard training session, and that's it. That's literally the straw that broke the camel's back, and a symptom presents itself. If you can reduce these considerations, then the symptomology goes right the way down, and no symptoms present. Am I sort of are you with me on this one? Yeah, it's straightforward, really. So biochemistry, it's a very, very complicated thing. These are just some of the things that you could consider that relate to your developing your optimum performance. Obviously, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, essential fatty acids, vitamins, phytonutrients, fibre, minerals, trace elements, ultra-trace elements, and obviously water. You've also got to consider all the other considerations there that I've mentioned, and I'm sure many others. Whoops. Can I go back on that? Thanks. And I've put, but the base of all of these, the foundation of each individual's biochemical pyramid is hydration and cellular electrolyte balance. Without these vital components, the rest will not work as efficiently or as effectively as they could. And those 5 S's, the strength, stamina, suppleness, speed, and psychology, will in some way be compromised. So that's what we're looking at today specifically with regards to the ELETE. Also, I wanted to point this out. The mantra in the naturopathic profession has been that the foods today are not as good as they used to be. So, okay, we can look at junk foods, and we don't particularly want those because of the various sort of sugar, carbohydrates, fats that are included. But if we go into taking, let's say, apples and broccoli and so on and so forth, that's a good idea, but actually, are we getting the right nutrients from it? And in the naturopathic profession, it's always been said that the foods today are never as good as they used to be. And I went and done some research work on that in the British Library and came across this astounding sort of result, that if you look at these different aspects of vegetables, fruit, meats, cheeses, and you actually trace them from 1940 right the way through to 2002, I managed to trace 72, and that weighted average demonstrates the loss of these minerals over time. And the only trace element that is present there is copper, because it was found to be essential in 1928. So all of those foods just taken together, there's a loss of 62% of that copper. Now, since 1928, of course, we've got zinc, we've got selenium, we've got molybdenum, we've got silica, a vast variety of other trace elements come into the picture as being demonstrated to be essential. So if that's happened to copper, the likelihood is that it's happened to others. And that's why, again, when you're trying to push yourself, you're looking at the optimum performance, you really do need to make sure that you're not just mineral balance, but all the other vitamins, probiotics, everything else is actually there, available for your body to utilize. The very fundamental of a cell, if you can visualize it as a balloon, and we've got trillions within us, external to that cell is basically seawater, sodium chloride, together with some calcium. Internally in the cell is potassium chloride with magnesium, and it's what's called the sodium-potassium pump in between the cellular reservoirs that give us that energy. But it's far more it's far more to it than that, as ultimately we begin to find out as we do more and more research. And this particular diagram is just there to illustrate that the other trace and ultra-trace elements, such as the sulfates, the chromium, the manganese, and so on and so forth, are equally very, very important if we're going to get cellular metabolism to work at its optimum. So, let's go to this little experiment that I have here, because this product, ELETE, incidentally, when you pick up your goodie bags at the end, there's one of these bottles in the goodie bag. And what it contains is a blend of naturally derived electrolytes, which I'll explain to you shortly. But each bottle is sufficient for 10 litres. So one capful is sufficient for a litre. And when you've finished, the idea is that you take the nipple off and you buy a bigger bottle and you just refill it. So this happens to be the most expensive part of the equipment, so don't chuck it away. Use it, hopefully you'll gain or you'll notice a difference, and then rebuy a bigger bottle in order that you can keep this particular one with you. Now, interestingly enough, this is a very, very simple experiment, but don't ever play around with this because you've got 220 volts or 110 volts going through here. Water is actually an insulator of electricity, provided all the minerals have been taken out of it. So what I've done here is that I put Chris's water, which is basically everything's been stripped out of it, into this little glass, and I'm turning on the light bulb. Now, if there was any ability for that electricity to actually pass from the anode to the cathode, we'd get the filament lighting. This particular water is a water that comes from the UK. It's known as a spring water, and it's promoted quite heavily because of the minerals that are present in it. The thing about the minerals are that they can go in one end and come out the other pretty much the same. It depends on the state of the minerals, whether the body can actually absorb and utilise them. So I'm going to turn that off, put that into that one, and you can see the light bulb lighting up. Now this is, as I say, a water that's promoted as being heavily, have a lot of mineral components. This is the ELETE, and the reason I'm showing this is that one of the scientific determinants of absorbability is actually the conductance of minerals in water. And that's just one drop. So it just gives you a sense of how easily absorbed and assimilated these minerals are, in order that you can again help with that aspect of providing not only a mineral balance that's physiologically appropriate, but in terms of the sodium, potassium, magnesium, but also the trace and ultra-trace elements, which is what I'll try and explain to you now. How to effectively optimise hydration and mineral balance. Okay. As I said, hydration, we're made up roughly about 60% water, so that gives you some sense of the significance of water. What I would suggest is that you actually use ELETE in all your drinking water. One of the things I wanted to do, and I don't think I've got round to doing it, is if we can get a couple of bottles, one with water and one with water plus ELETE, and then afterwards you can just take a taste of the water on its own. And when I say taste, I know it sounds odd to taste water, but get a sense of the taste of the water and also the texture of the water. Because when you put the minerals in, you should notice a difference. And I know this sounds incredibly odd, but it actually tastes wetter. So how does water taste wetter? Well, one of the reasons is that this particular product, it doesn't contain any colourings, flavourings, whatever. It's just pure electrolytes. And it is functional. And when I say functional, what we were able to do, or the States was able to do, is that when the Californian firefighters were fighting those fires, I think it must have been about 8, 9 years ago, they wear these amazing suits that they literally just drop them into the fire, and they fight these fires for literally 10-hour stints. And they have the water, they have their food, it's a self-contained unit, and they measured the physiological parameters of these people before and after, and they split them into two. Those people who had just water in their camelbacks, and those that had water plus ELETE. And they measured them, as I say, before and afterwards, and they found that afterwards their physiological parameters were the same. But those that took the water had to drink 75% more water to stay equally hydrated. That's a phenomenal amount more water. And that's because, again, the minerals assist in terms of the absorption. When you start tasting the water, you'll sense it as being softer because it's actually being absorbed through the mucous membrane of the mouth. This, again, the product, it's safe. You don't have to have any worries in terms of drug considerations because it's actually been registered by what's called informed sport. So they test it on a regular basis. It's also safe physiologically. There's a saying in English, I don't know whether it's the same in Denmark, but if you take too much of it, it goes through you like a dose of salts. Yeah? So in other words, it becomes a laxative. There's no ways, a little bit like vitamin C. In the context, there's a bowel tolerance. And if you hit that bowel tolerance, you just basically know you've taken sufficient. It's convenient, so I've tried to show you that little bottle. You can, again, use it so easily. You can put it in your pocket on the bikes. You can, and as I say, one capful is sufficient for 1 litre. But you'll just get used to literally squirting as much as you require into your drinks as you require them. The versatility is that actually what you'll probably learn far more about today is that obviously we can't live on water and electrolytes alone. We need carbohydrates, we need proteins, we need a vast variety of other micronutrients as well. But if you can use this as your electrolyte source, then you're actually confident that you're getting the appropriate balance. And you can put this into carbohydrates. You can cook with it, essentially, because it is a salt. You can mix it with your protein drinks. So it provides you with a very confident source of electrolytes to use as you require. Equally, as you know, on your, when you're competing, often all you want is water. You don't want the sugars, you don't want the colourings, the flavourings, the preservatives that you invariably find with Gatorade or Lucozade or whatever, Powerade. All you want is an effective source of hydration. Versatile, and of course it's incredibly cost effective. I mean, again, a big large, what's called team bottle, it works out in pounds and pence at 10p per 500 mils, which is negligible in comparison to what the conventional drinks, sports drinks are. And of course it's relatively environmentally green because you're not using all the different bottles that you pick up and chuck away. You're just using, I think a large bottle is sufficient for about 200 litres. So it's a significant help in that regard. And the testimonials are amazing. This is what happens. We have a body of water, which is the Great Salt Lake in America, which is actually 10 times denser than seawater. So I'm sure you're aware that salt, the table salt, is very significantly different than seawater. Seawater contains all the minerals, trace elements, ultra trace elements actually in the periodic table. So it's a very complex ionic, the minerals themselves are in the ionic form, which basically means you can't go any smaller. They have an electrical charge. When the water is taken from the Great Salt Lake into an evaporation dam, there's no further water input. So the sun actually evaporates the water, sodium chloride begins to crystallize out, and it takes 2 years of moving this from one dam to the next. And I think they lose in the process something like 95% of the original liquid to end up with a concentrated source of electrolytes. I don't know if you can see just this line here. What they have then done is that they've married the sea minerals without sodium chloride, which is dominantly magnesium, with the sea minerals from the Great Salt Lake. They've added a pure form of potassium chloride, and that's basically what ELETE is. This is a testimonial by the UK athletics senior nutritionist. And I think, again, as I was trying to explain to one of the participants here, what has happened in the UK is quite an interesting phenomena for me, because I've obviously had sporting, a sporting background and various connections, is that the Premier football clubs use it, the Lawn Tennis Association use it, the UK athletics team use it, the English rugby team use it, but not many people are actually aware of it in terms of ordinary folk, if I can put it in that sort of context. And this is a testimonial given by Glenn, who was the senior athletics nutritionist and still is, which I'll leave you to read in your own time, but I hope that you can get a sense from that it's a valid product. I don't know how good your English is. But yeah, so that's really the end of that presentation. I mean, I'm only too happy to answer any questions you may have, but I hope I've given you some sort of insight to why it is that you need, if you're ever going to reach your optimum performance as an athlete, you need to look at all the considerations that I've been here and probably more in terms of being able to optimize that. And the difference between what it was like then, that's 40 years ago when I was training and competing, and now is that you do have a team of people who can really begin to help you optimize in all of these considerations to make the most of what you've got in order for you to actually achieve those ambitions that we all strive for in terms of the sports that you're working with. Thank you. Yes?
I was just curious, if you pre-mix water with the ELETE, how long will it stay stable? So if you were doing an adventure race over several days, could you mix everything in advance and just place it along your route and it won't dissipate or go out of ionic form or anything like
that? It is inert in that, it's like salt. It is like adding the salt. So the wonderful thing, for instance, in terms of camelbacks, is that because it is inert and contains no sugars or anything else, is that you don't get the furring. There's no bacterial component. It's just yeah. Yes.
I spoke to earlier because I helped some ELETE boxers and also some ELETE fitness and bodybuilders and powerlifters, and all those people we mess a lot with the water balance because they have to be in a certain weight, or in terms of fitness you have to have the water balance in par, because you have to get the water into the muscles, and we actually also use, as you told, potassium chloride or kalium chloride as it's also called. And then you told me that you've actually used it with some bodybuilders in England, and or you spoke to them about it, but
Yeah.
And in comparison to those sports where I mean, the water balance is often a very fine line between doing it to the limit and going over the limit. And if you do it to the limit, then everything is perfect. And if you go over the limit, then you can crash everything.
Yeah.
So how would this work in those terms?
Well, again, the recommended amount that you take on this is, as I say, 1 litre. Sorry, 1 capful to a litre. But it allows you to personalise it for your own requirements. And when I say that, I'll use a couple of examples. One is that there was a very well-known cyclist in the UK who suffered chronically with cramps. And I sent him some ELETE and I said, look, this will sort it. There'll be no issue as far as your cramps are concerned. So I never heard from him for, you know, a considerable period of time. And then I phoned him and I said, what's been going on? You know, why haven't you come back to me? And he said, well, I tried it, but it didn't work. So fortunately, he thought about it, and instead of taking 1 capful per litre, he started upping it. And he eventually found that he had to take 6 in order to deal with the cramps. And I said to him, the reason you're in this situation is actually your body's terribly deficient in these different minerals. And if you start taking them on a very regular basis, then that 6 will come down to 5, will come down to 4, until eventually you're just using the 1. And that actually did happen. So when you're chronically cramping, you can actually use it neat. And again, because it assimilates, there's no further digestive process. I mean, one of the difficulties with minerals is actually to get them to be absorbed and assimilated. The digestion process has already been done with this. It's in what's called its ionic form. It can't get any smaller than that. That's why that light bulb lit up the way it did. So with you would literally need to experiment with it to find out how to tailor-make it for your own needs. And I appreciate that you have to take water out of the system in order to make sure that the body is being presented in its best way. But it's that fine line of taking too much out and then you're in a cramp situation. So this can act as in the same way with what they found with the firefighters. You don't have to have so much water to stay equally hydrated. And you may well find that by adding this to whatever water you're using allows you to optimize that particular circumstance that you require. But it would require you to personalize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also with the boxers who often weigh in, you know, 1 day or 2 days before, they often use a lot of, you know, maybe go to the sauna or sweat a lot, and they miss.
Yeah. One of the issues is that they then drink to rehydrate, and often you can feel it here. You won't get it with this because it absorbs immediately. You'll sense that's something of the past. Because there's an overload and the body just doesn't know what to do with it. But with this, it will actually allow that hydration to take place comfortably and more rapidly as well. You'll have to experiment.
Oh, yeah. It's just very interesting.
Does that mean that you don't feel thirst as much?
Well, the experiment that they used in the States was just by, it wasn't that you had to drink a certain amount, you just drank when you felt you were thirsty. So that, I would say yes, you know, that was obviously their reaction, that they only drank when they were thirsty, and they found out that they drank actually 40% less than those that just drank water as a result of that. Oh, blinded by science.
So Contador, he could have prevented the cramps that he experienced during the Vuelta of Spain. He might not have had the cramps if he had taken it.
Cramping is a medical condition. This is a food supplement. We can't deal with medical conditions because it's a food supplement. But should you actually have the correct electrolyte balance, you won't get the cramp. Yeah? So
it's possible, at the very least.
But again, it goes back to this little thing here. What he's doing is that he's pushing and pushing and pushing that limit, and then eventually he's going to hit a state of exhaustion. What this does is that it tries to optimize that, to allow him to push it that little bit further. I mean, ultimately, he'll still hit that exhaustion. But it's those little bits that make the difference between the winners and the losers, ultimately. Yeah? Oh. And in time.